Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of Psychedelic. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe. And if you like the show, leave a nice 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. But Apple Podcasts seems to be the main repository of ratings and reviews. So thank you to everybody who goes and does that. If you want to go a step further and support this show, this is an independent show. I do everything myself and trying to bring some heart-centered space, some open fields of conscious play and wisdom and knowledge and truth to the interwebs, to the world. So you can do that by going to my website, mikebrank.com. I have a Patreon link there on the homepage on the right-hand side, as well as a PayPal link if you want to just do a one-time donation to support the show. Or if you want to contribute on Patreon, you could also go to patreon.com/mikebrank, that's BRANC, and donate as little as $1, $2, $3, $1 million, whatever you feel. And you get access to like bonus episodes from time to time, stickers, t-shirts. I have a private chat group of people all around the world called the Psychedelic Inner Sanctum, and in there people are connecting and sharing, their trip reports, their experiences, their stories, and sharing links and articles and podcasts. And thank you. Thanks for all that you do, and thanks for your love and kindness and encouragement and your feedback. I love hearing from you. Message me. Again, you can go to my website, contact Mike. There's a contact form on there. Also on Facebook, Instagram, at Psychedelic_podcast, Psychedelic on Facebook, and Mike Brank as well. So, message me. I love hearing from you guys, getting emails or messages and interacting. I really feel like I want this to be a real participatory community endeavor and collaborative effort as well. So thank you. So today's episode is great. It's with the Future Thinkers, Mike and Euvie, who host Future Thinkers, the Future Thinkers podcast, and their website, futurethinkers.org, where they also have courses that they offer, they have a blog, they do live streams, and they're building a community as well. And I first initially found out about them through a listener of my show who sent me a link to an episode they did that I found to be really stimulating and engaging, and why I wanted to talk to them. I feel like they're curating very interesting conversations with deep thinkers and who are sort of emerging right now that I would also like to have conversations with as I sort of evolve and grow in this show. I always try and keep it fresh. I'm always searching and seeking for new ways of thinking and new understanding and new ways of being and new practices and processes to develop into. So Future Thinkers, go check them out. They're a media platform, community, and education portal. They're dedicated to the evolution of society, technology, and consciousness, and helping people become better adapted to the uncertainty of where things are going as things change with such rapid exponential growth and movement into new directions and new insulated bubbles of fractalized reality that it could be hard to make sense of things. And so this is, they talk about this a lot with the guests that they have on their show and the work that they do, making sense and collective intelligence. You're going to hear, these terms being brought up in the show. Omni-thriving, Euvie brought up, which I thought was really, really really interesting and new term that I just became aware of. But we really are in this space where it's an unprecedented time. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, that the internet has allowed us to be more connected than ever. And because of that connection, so many new things are able to emerge into a wider stage of awareness and a wider availability. People are being presented with new opportunities and new options for things that they might not have ever come in contact with before. So how do we merge with that? How do we learn with that? How do we integrate that? How do we make sense of that and navigate, the sometimes choppy, uncertain territory. So, they have great episodes like the one that I listened to with Jamie Wheel, Sense Making in Chaos, Meaning, Wisdom, and Transcendence with John Vervaeke, Overcoming the Meaning Crisis, Sovereignty versus Identity, The Shadow, and in Personal and Collective Consciousness, Spiritual Awakening and Development, Rethinking Transhumanism with Douglas Rushkoff, Reuniting Humanity. They've talked to Rupert Sheldrake about paradigm shifts in science and experiments in consciousness. So, really, really interesting, and they have a great approach. They seem to really complement each other very well, and taking a nice approach to picking the brains of some of the most original and unique thinkers. And that's something that we touched on in this show, is like, how do we all tap into that space for ourselves, and how do we unleash how do we unleash this sort of freedom and trust in ourselves to interpret the world around us, collaborate and communicate with other people, and come up with new ways of being to live a more satisfied, purposeful, and meaning-driven life. I think Joseph Campbell was talking about this the other day. I was listening to something like, he says, I don't think people are really looking for happiness. What people are looking for is meaning, some kind of something to make these lives that we're living worthwhile, something that can give us deep satisfaction, and that can like really stimulate us into being fully present and fully alive. And as Charles Eisenstein says, like, in this living earth, this living world, really becoming a part of this living world as one of the organs of the world, and not just something that is on top of a dying, decaying world that we extract resources out of, and invent abstract rules and theories that confine us into prisons of thought that suffocate us with ideology and trap us with limited beliefs and limitations. So I really was very happy to meet and interact with Mike and Euvie, and get to know how their journey and what they use to put into practice to make sense of the world around us, and to always keep that light shining on learning and curiosity and openness and space, and being receptive to changing situations, being nimble, flexible, and adaptive. And so these guys are really, really interesting, and their podcast is really interesting, and the things that they're offering and what they're talking about is really, really cool. I didn't have like a plan necessarily going into the conversation. I just recently became aware of them. I took notice of some of their podcasts. I listened to some of their things, and I really was just trying to kind of gain an understanding of how they see things, what they notice, and the kinds of learning that they're participating in and going through with the people that they work with in their courses, and with the interviews that they conduct with the people that come on their podcast. So, it's really, really cool. So I hope you guys enjoy this conversation, and if you do, please go leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It's really, really nice when you do that. It makes me feel good, and it makes the ideas that we think are worth spreading. If you think these ideas are worth spreading, if you think these conversations are exciting, and you like what we're talking about, by leaving a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, it helps boost us up in the algorithm, so more people can discover Mycadelic, more people can discover the people that I have on the show, like the Future Thinkers and other people, and more people can get exposed to these ideas, because really that is the key to unlocking a more a world that's more in harmony with how we actually naturally want to be, is if we can spread ideas that are worth spreading, and pop them into people's closed off, limited reality bubbles, to introduce them and to invite them into considering or pondering new ways and new things that they might not have had access to before. So it's really, really, really that's what I really, really care about, is the spreading and the sharing and the inviting to join in the conversation and to participate. There's so many times online that we see maybe somebody doing something and we say, oh, that sucks, that's stupid, and we like close them down, push them out, smash them to pieces, talk shit, whatever. But really, I want this show and the things that I'm doing to invite dialogue, to start a fire at the campsite and say, hey, sit down and join us and share and listen and think deeply and try and erode the constructs of the cultural toxicity that has been layered and plastered upon us from the conditioning that we've all been forced into since such an early age. And so maybe the awakening that's occurring in this time is just an awakening of multiple points of invitation to consider, to think, to feel, to create space in new and different and novel ways, in diverse ways. And that is, I think, a path forward for us, as we're learning and we're seeing each other more and we're connecting more. So I'm just really, really happy when I see other nodes of consciousness, other things taking shape and taking form that are also doing that, like Future Thinkers and like, other podcasts and other outlets and other YouTubers that are out there that are creating their own communities and tribes and offering something really unique and really fresh and really new to try and be that beacon of light to shine a way to say, hey, come over here and see what you think, and that is the most important thing, is making sure that we do our best job to invite others to the party, to basically say, hey guys, there's an opportunity. We have multiple choices here. So you don't have to participate in this mainstream dominator paradigm. You don't have to participate in the things that you see directly in front of you. But there is an opportunity for us to reach out, to start conversations, to collaborate and to share and to invite others to have a seat at the table, to be exposed to just new, diverse, and novel modes of thought, modes of being, modes of feeling, modes of making sense in sometimes what could be an almost senseless world. But we're here. We are here. These pillars are popping up. Mike and Euvie, myself, people like Charles Eisenstein. It's hard to think off the top of my head, but there's many people out there that are doing these things, and it's really coming from a passionate place of finding truth and finding meaning amongst what could look like despair, destruction, devastation, chaos, the terrible unknown, the shadow elements that come out of our unconscious as we get into on this show with Mike and Euvie, and yeah, spread it and share it. So thank you to everybody that does. Really, really appreciate it very much. And it's not, it's not for me. It's for the life force within me that's yearning and desiring to bring about something that's a little bit more happier and pleasant and peaceful and in a harmonic vibe with reciprocity and reverence, respect, love. That's what makes me feel most alive. That's what makes my being come out to be most present and most connected. And I think we're all searching for that. So whatever we can do to bring that up wherever it is, there's room for everybody to participate. There's room for everybody to share. If you're listening right now and you think maybe I have some ideas or I have some things that I want to do it. Start doing it, and let's help each other. Let's support each other. Send it to me, like pick my brain. I'm interested to know, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? What do you feel? And what are you maybe yearning to create? So, having said all that, we're about to share a conversation that I think contributes to this way with Mike and Euvie. They are the future thinkers. They have the podcast. They do videos. They have the courses, and they're all about the evolving technology that we see in the world, society and consciousness, focused to create a more sustainable future for all of us, for all of humanity, for all of the world. And the podcast explores questions like, what does the future of humanity hold, and how can we help engaging and participating to be a part in creating and birthing this. How can we create societies where all human beings can thrive? As I mentioned, UV bringing up omni-thriving. What is the nature of reality and consciousness? And like I said, Mike and UV are having these conversations and these discussions and participating in this collaboration with new emerging deep thinkers and all kinds of brilliant thinkers, not just new ones, but a lot of emerging new thinkers that are being shaped by this exponential increase in connectedness brought on by the internet and the availability of information and the access to old shamanic practices and different ways of connecting and being, old ways, new ways, all merging together as one as we inevitably every moment and every second of the day unfold into the future. And the topics they discuss include emerging technologies like blockchain, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, transhumanism, future societies, consciousness, meditation, psychedelics, and the philosophies that connect all these things. We didn't really get too much into like AI or virtual reality or transhumanism on this show. But if you're interested in that sort of stuff, definitely go check them out. It was a pleasure to connect with them, to talk with them, to pick their brains, to get there, to understand their points of view and their perceptions. And I hope you guys are going to enjoy this show. So without further ado, let's get into it with the future thinkers, Mike and UV. Thanks.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Words of perception.
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
Eastern Europe. Good neck of the woods.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works for us.
Cool. Yeah. So just thanks for making the time. I know you guys are super busy and taking calls and all that stuff. And I someone sent me a link to one of your episodes. I think it was with Jamie Wheel, and I was listening to it and I was like, this is awesome. And I read Jamie's book Stealing Fire that he wrote with Stephen Kotler, and like his perspective has shifted, I think, so much.
Yes.
From that book and kind of departed from Kotler, and I really like what I heard from Jamie, and then I got introduced to Daniel Schmachtenberger, and I'm just like, you guys kind of like opened this door for me of these new thinkers. I mean, I knew Jamie, but I didn't know Daniel. So, and some other people too. And I'm just like, okay, this is really cool, because I had felt like I'm being insulated in this bubble. I feel like I'm embedded in the psychedelic community, whatever that is. But anyway, yeah. So that's how I came to you, and I would love to just kind of have a chat about all things interesting. What are you guys thinking about? What's on your mind? Like, what have you been working on? All that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm rolling. Do you want to just go into it, or do you want to do?
Yeah, let's jump into it, and then usually what I do is I like to kind of keep it conversational, and then I'll do an intro like beforehand,
Sure.
or after. I'll invent a time machine and I'll go back in time and do the intro. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So what's going on with you guys? What's at the top of your minds right now? I'm interested to know what you're thinking about, what you're working on at this current moment.
There's a lot going on in the world and in the media that is pretty synchronistic in what we're thinking about and working on. There's kind of this collective thing of people processing grief about the change of the environment, potentially the collapse of civilization, a lot of things like that. So what we're focused on Future Thinkers tends to be about the broader societal changes that we're all going through. But it also goes down to a really micro level of what individuals are going through, because, individuals do make up the collective intelligence of our planet. And, if a lot of people are kind of stuck in trauma or unconscious behaviors or fear or grief or any of these things, then the collective intelligence that manifests as a result of that is going to be pretty scary and potentially
destructive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's really interesting because I feel the same way, and I'm noticing that as well. And I feel like I've been having conversations with people that are thinking on that kind of large systems level thinking and civilizational level thinking, and I'm very, very interested in that. And I'm wondering, where do you guys see this happening or feel this happening the most? I have a tendency to think that nowadays it's very much like online that a lot of this is manifesting. And then we can get into the debate of like, well, is it the real world or is it the online world? And does it matter? Like, isn't the online world full of people too? So where is this like kind of playing out the most, do you think? I mean, right now there's protests happening all over. People are setting things on fire in Chile, Spain, Catalan independence, Hong Kong, everywhere seems to be things going on. I don't know about the US so much. It seems it's interesting here. There's something else happening here too. So yeah, I'm wondering where you guys see this happening and feel this kind of happening.
It depends on who you ask, and generally it depends on what age range you're asking. Young people will associate young people will associate their identity a lot more with their online persona and a lot less with their kind of meat space version. Older people, it's kind of the opposite. And we do weekly calls where we have a range of those two age groups, and it's really interesting to see the difference between how people perceive the world and how they engage online and in the real world. It's quite different.
I think one of the things that I see happening is that people are starting to recognize that the online world is kind of the matrix. It's not real. And it definitely, I think, comes harder for young people because they grew up with it. So they just kind of got inundated with it and maybe thought that it was the real world. And there's a lot of disillusionment happening about that with, there's even a word, fake news, but it's actually as if it's a new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon. I mean, we've had propaganda for as long as we've had civilizations.
Yeah, so why don't people use the term propaganda? That's really weird to me. Fake news, really? This is a new concept?
Right, yeah.
So,
rebranding.
People are starting to realize that it's there's a lot of bullshit out there, and that what the reality that is being portrayed in the media is not real reality. And the call that we just got off of, actually, we were discussing that with a group, and people from all over the world, actually, in all different age groups. And everybody was noticing the same thing, that there seems to be a pattern of people wanting to go back to real life and interact with people face to face and engage with people face to face, as opposed to just consume media, or even in real life engage in things that are more participatory rather than observatory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, this sort of allure of the internet that has connected us all together. It's been like this kind of shiny toy dangling over a baby. We all get entranced by it, and it's new, and we're still trying to figure it out, But there's like this voyeuristic aspect that it also evokes as well, and can pull us out of really being in touch with, like, our organs and our feelings and what our meat radio signals tuning into others. The internet putting behind screens is is something really, really new for us, right? We're in this kind of unprecedented time, and you mentioned that it's kind of different, right, Mike? Like depending on who you talk to and how they're perceiving the world, and that's really interesting because I'm noticing that there is this sort of like fractalization of reality that's like happening, like parsing it out into like little tribal camps and getting into these insulated bubbles where you can be thinking that we live on the flat earth. You could be thinking that there's reptiles on the moon that are controlling us. I mean, you could be thinking that, climate change is global warming, where we're all going to just ignite into flames one day, So it's like, where's truth? How do we navigate this? Like, how are we going to create a better world or create better solutions and have people feeling better about the lives that they're living if we can't even agree on what is? Kind of a big question, but take a stab at it, guys.
Well, this is related to something we talk about quite a lot. A concept called sovereignty. That's not how it's traditionally been used. It's more about cognitive sovereignty, how you perceive the world, how you make sense of the world, how you take action, or in other words, inputs, processing, outputs, if you want to put it into more concrete logical terms. People are not very sovereign in that sense. They're not making clear sense of the world and finding ways to get clear perception, and they're not taking action based off of any of those first two steps. What has ended up happening quite a lot lately that I've been noticing is people are really trying to externalize all of their sense-making abilities. And that leads to a lot of kind of...
What does that mean? Like, externalize their sense-making abilities? Can you explain that a little bit? They're
looking for other people to tell them what to do, to make change, to take action, to make sense of the world. They're externalizing all of that stuff. And there's been a resurgence of this kind of populist movement. And the whole Extinction Rebellion thing is also an interesting aspect of this. It's like, how much do you see the messages surrounding this movement actually being about someone else needs to do something rather than what can I as an individual do? And people seem to have like given up on that idea that any one individual can do anything. And it's like, actually, no, you could, there's tons you could do, but it's just hard. I mean, if you really want to have like a global impact, stop demanding the most inefficient system we've ever invented, government, do anything about it. It's what actually has functioned to make change in the world. Actually, capitalism's done a pretty good job. I'm not a big fan or proponent of capitalism, but if you want to take action and do it with efficiency, you need to find a product market fit, something people want to use that you can get money to build and then send to market, and then people will want to use it and pay money for it and adopt it. If it's more efficient, if it's more cost effective, people will use it. That's the whole idea of markets. But
at least now we need to do that, because that's the container in which we're existing in. That's what we've all been conditioned to accept as the framework for our existence. It's like we can't just pop out of that model and tomorrow something radically new just like births into existence. So we sort of have to play that game a little bit, right? And we definitely like this, I feel like we've just kind of acquiesced to this like dependence model upon higher institutions and centralized authority. So it can be confusing. It can be very, very difficult too to realize like, hey, you can take action yourself.
But don't get me wrong about this. I'm not actually like advocating capitalism is the solution. I'm really trying to highlight the fact that people will abdicate responsibility to some external source. So that I've seen a breakdown in sovereignty and sense making on the individual level, and an outsourcing all of those mechanisms to external agents. There's also a rise in gurus and cults happening now. So you can see this manifest in these external figures of authority and sense making.
So the point is that, and it's funny because the idea of sovereignty is also not new. It's just the idea of think for yourself and question everything, instead of trying to get some daddy figure to tell you what's what, or protect you, or, lead you to a bright future. Just figure out for yourself what is true, what is real, what matters to you, and what you can do about all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm thinking about like I spend time like looking at I used to be like kind of entrenched in a libertarian camp, and then like anarcho-capitalist, and now I'm just like I don't want to pigeonhole myself to like any one particular label. And I'm also starting to think that and I know you guys probably talk about this too a lot. I've seen some videos you're talking about blockchain and crypto and tech, things like that. And so maybe we're evolving and we just don't know where we're going yet to a new economic framework or a new economics or a multitude of new ways to form economic agreements with each other. And so I bring that up because I hear no, socialism's the way, we got to elect Bernie, that'll fix everything. And that goes back to that abdicating responsibility and depending upon these higher centralized powers. And like the other night I was at a talk with Charles Eisenstein, and someone was bringing up like, well, can't we just like take that $700 billion from the military budget and just put it into like education or something? It's like, yeah, we could, like, but we can't because we don't have access to that lever. And the people that do have access to that lever, that's not what that institution is programmed to do.
It's
like
also, since when did, the internet's been around for a while. Why do we still think this sort of college university institution hyper centralization of education is the ideal model? Yeah. Like I've chosen not to go into university after I finished my college stuff for audio and music production, and I started my own business and I started working in tech, and I taught myself to do programming and design and animation and video editing and podcast editing, and I built a whole setup to be able to make a studio and record podcast episodes. And I run a business, I do all this online stuff, and it's like no one taught me that in school. Right. I just checked out a bunch of YouTube videos and learned how to do it. And when I talk to some friends back home who have degrees in various fields of communications and business, and it's just like, it's absurd how little they know, how little they've learned from their very, very expensive education. So I mean, you highlighted the problem a little bit in saying that why don't we just take the money and spend it on furthering education? Well, the problem is not that those opportunities don't exist, is that people aren't driven to go do that for themselves. Mm-hmm. There's nothing stopping you from Googling anything you want or YouTubing anything you want to figure out. The degree is the only difference. You're going to get a degree from the institution, and a lot of debt.
And in part, this has to do with how the education system is set up. I mean, it squashes people's creativity. It turns them into drones that are perfectly capable of operating in a corporate environment and, running on autopilot, basically, but they're not capable of thinking for themselves. And I'm sure it's useful for for the corporations, but it's not useful for the individual. So I don't blame people, if they want to change paths halfway through life and they find it really difficult to teach themselves because it's been bred out of them. I think it just needs to start a lot earlier. I think it needs to start in how children are educated, that creativity is fostered, and that critical thinking and questioning things and being self-driven is fostered rather than being put into a track where you're just fed information.
Right. Yeah. And Mike kind of alluded to, like being autodidactic and in your learning and just discovering for yourself and finding out through experience and trial and error. And that doesn't seem to be like, encouraged in this mainstream apparatus. So it's really, for the people that I'm really interested in figuring out, like maybe hearing a little bit both of your journeys too, of that like awakening process or maybe it was always there for you. But I'm really interested in like this, like, how do people who don't know? It's like, where is the moment that says like, hey, there's other ways? Because it seems like, there's this like definite herd mentality of people who are just, okay, I'm going to go do this and then I'm going to go do that. And I got to get the degree because I got to get the job. But like you said, it really kind of molds you, that way of thinking kind of makes you think to be grateful for that opportunity, but you're kind of just tampering yourself down and not really fully expressing the uniqueness that you might have to offer if you go out on your own. So I'm really interested in like maybe your guys' thoughts or your journey, your story of kind of discovering like, hey, I can do this, and and how can other people kind of come to that realization if those options, they don't even know those options are really available, even though they're kind of omnipresent.
There are a lot of answers to this question in, I would say, evolution and biology, and temperament of people. The only reason I even got this spark started of self-learning was because I was a very disagreeable kid. Like, you couldn't make me do anything. And as soon as I found out like the internet and Carta encyclopedia, and because I was doing that probably in the mid 90s, everything exploded for me. I could learn about spiders and music and space and dinosaurs and all kinds of things. And suddenly my learning was self-directed, and I actually would skip school to go home and learn on the internet. And I think in grade 11 and 12, I skipped more than 55% of all my classes.
That's funny. Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. I still managed to graduate somehow, but people are resistant to learning new things and self-directing because it's actually quite energy intensive to do that work. It's not easy, and it's risky. And a lot of people, just out of an unconscious desire for things to just make sense, they do what is written in the cultural script, and they don't really question that path. And it can be a really expensive choice to make, because not only we've just talked about student loan debt, but these types of scripts don't exactly prepare you adequately for the real future that's coming. They're more about kind of a 1970s model or like a pre-industrial or industrial civilizational kind of model, not this like post-capitalistic game B kind of model of the world. None of that stuff that they teach in schools really prepares people to have to, first of all, self-direct and figure out what is useful to spend their energy on. And then also there's a high degree of kind of fragility mindset that's happening now, where people think exposure is damaging. Exposure to the world, exposure to new ideas, exposure to, I don't know, the elements, weather, any number of things. There's this idea that we're fragile, and so we should be sheltered from the world. And this kind of mentality is also preventing us from gaining the skills that we need to be able to be more adaptive.
Right. Yeah. Protection, safety, security, safe spaces, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, that path was a little bit different than for Mike. I tried for a lot longer to go with a prescribed script of, get an education and all of that. Because I just never really thought that entrepreneurship was an option. So I went to university, I studied psychology, and but I just hated it. It just seemed so impractical. And that thing that I talk about, where even if you're studying something you love, is your curiosity and critical thinking and all of that is just going to be beat out of you. And that's what I kept facing over and over and over again. Like I just loved learning and I loved the subjects, but any kind of thinking outside of the box was completely shut down. I got a failing grade on this essay that I wrote about something that just was outside of like the two options that they gave us. Like, you can basically write about this or this, and I didn't do that. I just wrote something that I thought was a better solution, and I got a failing grade. And things like this happened all the time. And eventually I just gave up and I dropped out of university. And then I went back, and then I dropped out again. And then I started freelancing and doing art stuff and just kind of following my own curiosity and creativity. But yeah, it was definitely it was so much failure. It was so hard, and I was broke for so many years. And it wasn't until I met Mike and then learned more about business that, we were able to build something together that actually worked. But even that took many, many years. So for me, I would say that the traits that kind of pulled me through it was curiosity, creativity, and just stubbornness, honestly. Just being stubborn despite failing and being broke. I was like, no, fuck it. I'm still going to do what I want to do.
Yeah, it sounds like, you really you guys are tuned in to listening to what your heart and soul and, consciousness desires and where you want to be directed to, and following that path no matter what, because what else is there other than that? You're going to become somebody else that somebody wants you to be or think. I feel like it's like whenever I interact with anybody who's in school and they're telling me like, oh, I have this thing and I have to do this and it's either this or that, I'm like, that is terrible. To be limiting, like the accumulation of facts and the regurgitation of like things that people have wrote before. Like we sort of value that in our educational system as wisdom, or knowledge, and it's like people aren't being taught like how to think. And I think you guys are doing that, bringing, kind of curating these great thinkers and really digging in and exploring, and also with the courses and calls that you're doing. You guys are the teachers now, right? How does that feel?
We're more participants. I mean, there's some life circumstances that have pushed us forward and into some experiences that you could say are kind of unique. There's been a lot of difficulties that have been concentrated into a short amount of time that have also been unique. We left Canada in 2013 and have been traveling the world since. So we've had a lot of exposure to the world and to different cultures and different ways of thinking. So it's just being on a slightly faster track that has put us into a position of being able to teach others. But still, in the calls especially that we do, we're just participants with everyone else. There's a set of practices that we're all using together that add up to a lot more learning that can take place from everybody, just from participation. So it doesn't really feel like anything to be teaching this stuff. It's just more exciting to see transformation in other people and to participate in that transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah.
I would say we're more facilitating than teaching. And I think I kind of have a feeling that might be the teaching of the future. That it's not top down, it's not me telling you what is what, it's more about, even in our courses, we're just presenting a set of practices and frameworks that have worked for us, and then saying to people like, try this, see if it works for you, and then you can pick and choose and grow in whatever ways you want to grow. We're not prescribing a way of thinking. And in the calls, it's even more open. It's just we're trying to tap into a state of collective intelligence and see what emerges.
If anything, we're trying to help people to be better at processing the world rather than finding the ideal state to be in. There's been a lot of discussion in the last several weeks or months about the difference between state and process. And that one's a big thing that really keeps coming up over and over again. And we're trying to look for like the ideal state to put the world into, or the ideal state to be in mentally to be able to deal with the world. And it's kind of an old way of doing things. It's the way we've done them for several hundred years or more. And it's partially the reason we're in this problem, in this state to begin with, is because we're not very good at processing things as they come along, processing collective intelligence, processing real-time decision-making, these types of things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it makes me think of something that I was talking about the other day. Someone messaged me and they heard me on a podcast and they said, I'm wondering, how did you go from being someone who needed healing to now being a healer? And I was like, well, I'm not a healer, first of all. And the other thing is, I didn't go from one place to the other place. Like this false dichotomy of like being in one static location or being one static identity, or as you put it, like in this state, right? Like, I think that you really hit something there when you were saying that, because so I see that happening all over the place, even in the spiritual community and the psychedelic community. We want to get to a location where we can kind of go, oh, I know everything and I feel great and I'm just going to be here forever. But really, that's not what's going. That's like a delusion. Like, you know, it's like with this we have to be able to kind of like swim in the currents of processing this exponential, increasing, fragmenting reality, change, shift, all this stuff. Like, how do we dance with that? You know?
And our addiction to state rather than process is manifest in so many different avenues. Like you said, like in the religious community or spiritual community, it's like, I want to achieve the state of enlightenment, not the process of enlightenment. Like that's a big shift. Or the techno-utopians will be like, how do we achieve the state of the singularity? You know, think of the word you're using. Like singularity is a process. It is a thing that's, you know, it's not a state. It's not static.
Right.
And
yeah. Everybody
so
has their
fields that way.
Yeah. Everybody has their heaven. Right. Like, yeah.
Not realizing that that's the kind of thing that sets you up for disappointment. If you do eventually achieve, which is rare, but if you achieve your ideal version of what your future would look like, you're still gonna, because you've been so state dependent, not process dependent, you're looking for the external circumstances that will make you happy rather than the process that makes you happy. Instead of practicing the process, we're working towards some future thing that's supposed to happen, and then we get to be happy.
Yeah,
you know,
some
it's
carrot
a
on
treadmill.
a stick. Yeah. Euvie, what do you think about that? What's your process been like? How unfolding? Have you, question for both of you guys too. Like, have you found yourself in points where you were in a state or thinking from that state-like mentality, and what was the transition into the process kind of mentality like?
Yeah, I would say it's been pretty gradual. It's not like something that just a switch that goes off. And we're still learning it. I mean, as we were talking about the courses, like, we didn't just become teachers. I'm still learning so much, and I'm learning so much actually from the participants in the course. And I feel like we're co-travelers rather than like us instructing somebody. And it's the same with this. I mean, we're figuring out how to be in the process and how to be in that participatory knowing, as John Vervaeke calls it. I don't know if you've watched his series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's really great, but that's one of the core ideas, is that part of what is causing this meaning crisis for people is that they are attached to propositional knowing. So they want to know something as a static thing, grasp it, without actually having any experience or without practicing it for themselves. And instead, it's participatory knowing that's actually really meaningful and transformational for people. So that's the kind of embodied process rather than state. So, and even that thing is been a process for me and for both of us. I mean,
right. Yeah. I hear this all the time in the psychedelic spiritual realm. You know, I killed my ego. You know, I destroyed my ego. So now I'm,
the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's talking?
Yeah. And it's like, this idea that, it's like, well, I want somewhere to land. And like we started off the conversation talking about these large power structures in our society that rely on, force and coercion, like government and, manipulative institutions that demand our worship, and participation. It's like, that has created this sort of like dependence where people are giving themselves away and giving their power away. So they think there's a place to go. They think that there's a place to land. Like, one of my favorite quotes by Thomas Jefferson is like, the timid men fear the calm of timid men settle for the calm of despotism over the tempestuous sea of liberty. And so there's so much fear that's like existing. It's like we're swimming in this ocean of fear. So people really want to just land somewhere and be there and rest there and say, oh, everything's going to be okay. And it takes a lot of effort and energy to just swim in the ambiguity of like insecurity and unknowing, and it's like, Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to say that.
I've been playing with this metaphor for a while that we're like monkeys swinging from tree to tree in the jungle, swinging from branch to branch. And every branch that we swing to and from is representative of a meaning structure or a belief system that we're holding to, that we put our weight on and that supports us. And something I've been advocating quite a lot in the last, I don't know, several years, I guess, is letting go of those meaning structures altogether and getting used to falling.
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying thing, but something that came up in conversation today about falling, it's like, if you can actually feel that sinking feeling in your stomach of falling from a great height and get comfortable with that, learn to deal with that feeling. And that's a metaphor, obviously, for any number of experiences where we feel out of control to the circumstances in our lives. If we can just get used to that and get comfortable with it and take sovereign action from that state, then we've already done so much work towards our own resilience and ability to cope with those situations. Like that is probably, in my mind, one of the most resilient places you can come from. Just
is that like
comfort in chaos?
Yeah, comfort in chaos, totally. And like I've just, you guys talking about sovereignty is like, it's this surrendering into your own sovereignty, I think, right? That is kind of scary because a lot of people maybe don't even know, like, well, who am I if I'm not attaching to all these things, right? And that could be,
yeah. I suppose not. I wouldn't use the word sovereignty. I would say maybe surrender into your perceptions, into what is perceivable, but the agency and the sense making part are a lot of work. Like they're processes and kind of systems that you have to build up to be able to process the world a little better. I mean, there is some aspect of surrender, but I would say the surrender part is probably on the perception level, wouldn't you say?
I haven't really thought about it in that exact way, but surrendering into sovereignty does resonate with me as something that, at least at that point of where people are at, where they are not leaning on their sovereignty, that's what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like surrender. And I've actually had this conversation with people quite a few times where they say, like, well, if I don't have a guru or a teacher or a guide pointing me the way, like, how do I know anything? How do I know if where I'm going is the right way to go? And so that is a point of surrender, because you don't, and you still have to do it. And that's how sovereignty is built, because it's not externally given ever. And if you have never exercised that muscle, then it's going to be weak and limp and useless, and it's going to hurt. But then eventually, as you exercise it more, it's going to get better and more skilled. You're going to get more skillful with it. So it is a bit of a surrender, I would say. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, just, detaching, letting go, just kind of maybe trusting in yourself a little bit more, so, sort of these things. I know I see it a lot of the times when I talk to people, like sometimes people don't, especially younger people, they sort of don't have this truth of their personality, and trust in their perception. So they'll say things that they've heard 17 million times before in pop culture, like influencers or whatever the jargon that is going on. Like they just kind of like constantly shift into these like external personalities and like try on these other perceptions. It's like, hey, where are you? Like, where are you? Like, who's in there really? Like, what's going on? So it's a lot of that happening, and then it manifests online, and then people are screaming and yelling and being crazy.
So much of that stuff is just signaling, though. Like that's something I really, we focused on in the courses quite a lot, is trying to bring people's attention to their unconscious desires to be liked or perceived a certain way. How you want to be perceived dictates, especially nowadays, it dictates so much about people's actions online. It's all about perception. So people, they'll spout off random ideologies that they have not really investigated in order to seem smart, or they'll do that call-out culture. They'll participate in call-out culture. And I can speak.
Right, yeah.
And try and like get social points for calling out other people for behavior that they have immediately deemed to be
immoral.
Yeah, that like kind of approval. It's safe to go here because it's been like other people are doing it,
Yeah.
And that's so much like I used to work in advertising in New York, and it was just this data mining advertising digital agency. I left because I was like, this is nuts. Like what we're doing. This is like, even though it's like legal, it's just wrong. It doesn't feel good to me that we're really manipulating and like preying upon people. I mean, that's how I see it. But it's this predictability. Like we want to be able to like be sure to ensure success all the time, to ensure that we'll be liked, ensure that we're okay, that no one's gonna hurt us, and that sort of thing, which can, going to the extreme ways, which we see sometimes, this like good intentioned utopian vision. I think you brought up Extinction Rebellion, stuff like that. It's like that can go too far too, and that utopian idealistic good intention can become crazy tyrannical and dystopian, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like what
Totally.
yeah.
I grew up in the Soviet Union, so there's one example. Good intentioned utopian vision that turned horribly tyrannical, and millions of people died in slave labor camps or just got disappeared for not agreeing with the government. So yeah, just because something is well intentioned, or just because it's legal, or because it's socially acceptable, doesn't mean it's good, and it doesn't mean that it's going to produce good outcomes for people. Like slavery was legal at one point.
Right.
Is it good? No, probably not.
Yeah, and I get the sense of a lot of people here in America just think, well, that can't happen here, like that won't happen here, and they sort of direct their energy on different kinds of things. I mean, Trump is just a symptom of the problem. I don't think he's, like this thing that a lot of people make him out to be. What do you guys think about the current climate, the current like kind of political climate, and how people are like interacting and interfacing with that?
I think most of what we've already talked about indicates what is happening in the world. Like the desire to appear a certain way, the desire to externalize sovereignty, perception, sense-making agency to external agents, because it's either on an energetic level, it's cost effective to do that, or because people are too lazy or they're too inexperienced. They're scared. Yeah. I think there's a lot of action that's taking place in the world that is completely based out of either grief or fear or panic.
Right.
Or a combination of all three.
So when I hear Greta Thunberg saying, I want you to panic, I'm like,
oh, great.
you are a cult leader's wet dream. Like,
right.
How many millions of people are listening to that? And then saying like, oh, we have to panic. And then from panic, people make terrible decisions and they don't trust themselves. And they go find some, strongman figure to give up their sovereignty to, who's going to fix everything. And it just perpetuates the same system that we've always had, probably even worse.
Yeah, wartime thinking. I'm thinking of like, after 9/11, it was like, well, we got to just do things to make things happen. So we got to just get this in there. Everyone's got to panic and go crazy, and we just have to pass this thing, these bills, this Patriot Act. We got to suspend liberties and freedoms because it's necessary. And yeah, I get that sense too. It's like, we don't have to go down that route. That could lead to a lot of trouble.
Even just a funny example yesterday, like I've got a little electric scooter in Plovdiv, and it's this really long walking street that I take every day to go to the gym. And I was like 2 meters away from this little girl and her mom, and the girl didn't see me coming and just like looked up and screamed. I was 2 meters away. It was quite a bit of space, and it's really maneuverable. And then the mom starts screaming at me as I pass by because her kid was startled, and that startled her. And I could just imagine this whole scenario unfolding of like, people aren't exactly super excited about seeing scooters all over the place, these electric scooters. Everyone kind of hates them, actually. And I could see like events like this taking place where there would be a scooter ban all over the city because too many people are so easily startled and not kind of used to handling their own safety, or used to fast moving objects, or whatever you want to say.
Or just used to paying attention to what's around
actually
them.
That's really it. There's so little like heads up awareness that people have. It's like,
Right.
it's that typical, like, here's a walking street, someone's looking to the right, walking to the left, and it's like they drive the same way, looking to the right, turning to the left. And it's like, take personal responsibility before you seek to change the world by enacting some ill-conceived law,
Yeah.
To create a
Yeah.
false sense of comfort.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's all, because
Right.
that's all
Yes.
it's doing is giving you comfort. It's not actually
Mm.
protecting you from anything. It's just like,
Yeah.
because you're not in danger most of the time anyway. That's the funny thing. It's like, how much
Yeah.
do you think these laws are really protecting you?
Well, they're not. I think laws are just words on paper. They're not even on paper anymore. Where are they? On screens? It's this invisible thing that just is that people think that has some kind of effect. As with banning guns or whatever. It's like, okay, well, sure, make all the laws you want. People are going to get what they want to get. People are going to do what they're going to do. You could write all the laws in the books. That's why we have something called criminals, or like whatever. So and this kind of way of thinking also is really detrimental to people kind of actually coming into a process way of looking at things, this kind of nuanced dance that we have to do, where we don't necessarily need top down blanket rules and situations that govern everybody just because one person jumped off of a rooftop because they ate too much LSD and thought they could fly, as Bill Hicks says. Why don't you take off from the ground? It's like there's it's just one person ruins it for everybody. That's not the kind of world that we should be living in. But like you were saying, Euvie, like it's this fear, it's this crazy fear, and that leads to just these things happening. And I had another point, but I kind of forgot what it was. But I would like to know a little bit more about, like, with all these ideas and collective intelligence and process thinking and everything, who are some people and what are some ideas that you've really heard recently, maybe from interviewing people on your podcast, that you really have heard them and you were like, okay, that seems to be a good direction forward. I've been talking with some people who, and I kind of have been thinking in this way too, that maybe it's going to take a crisis for people to kind of jolt awake and like break out of the matrix, some kind of crisis. And I was talking to Christopher Ryan the other day, who wrote the book Civilized to Death, and we were talking about I was in New York during Hurricane Sandy, and this like disaster where you would think that things would devolve into chaos, but it was the opposite. Everybody was lending a hand, being friendly. So that makes me sort of like, I don't want to have like a catastrophe, like wipe out lots of things, but there's something beautiful that comes out of crisis too. So I'm wondering, is it just a long way of me getting around to like, where are the ideas from the people that are thinking in a way that you guys think are going to help move us into a better future? And, or is there going to be some kind of like crisis point, or will it be like this slow evolution of integration?
I'd like to frame break your question a little bit, because
All right.
I think that now is the time for people to use their own sovereignty and sharpen their own perception, sense making, and agency, and figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Because listening to all these great ideas is awesome, but if it's just going to be the same pattern of consumption and simulated thinking, as Jordan Hall likes to call it, where you're not actually coming to these ideas yourself, you're just hearing them somewhere and then adopting them as if they're true without actually any practice, it's just going to result in the same kind of world. And that's not what we need. So I think that people need to take it into their own hands and start learning, start practicing, start interacting with other people, building things, and just seeing what you can do from like your own capacities from where you are. Not having some sort of grandiose idea about saving the world. I think that's super delusional. Just focusing on their own life. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do for many years now. Building things to our own capacity and learning things to our own capacity and trying things and failing and trying again. And, now interacting a lot more with other people and trying to do these group exercises and calls and things where we practice these kind of ways of being with other people. But it's just, I think it needs to be internally driven, not externally given.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And why? That's like, why do those things? Why, what's the point? What's the purpose? What, why should we engage in that mode?
Well, because that's how evolution happens. That's how new things emerge. So I think it's pretty clear that things are changing. I mean, things are always changing, but I do think that we are in some sort of a perhaps breaking point in our culture. And I think that a lot of people can feel that. I don't know if I need to convince anyone that things are changing. So that's taking things into your own hands and doing what you can is probably the best way to ensure that you're going to be okay in whatever future comes. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah,
we talk about a couple of processes that I think work. We also focus on like what is awakening and what does it look like to awaken to the real world, or at least to a more accurate. I mean, even I recognize as I'm saying this stuff, it's all kind of relative and perceptual, but there are a few practices that we've been really focusing on that work quite well for people. And the sovereignty thing, like uncovering ways in which your clarity and of perception and sense making about the world are not very clear, not very good, broken. Mm-hmm. And then the second part would be to face the kind of unconscious dark sides of your own personality and character. And being, like a physical being as well.
Yeah, that's huge. So
that concept is called shadow work. Carl Jung, I think, was one of the first people to really start talking about this idea of shadow work or facing the unconscious. And I brought up earlier this idea that there is so much decision making and action taking place from those places of grief or fear. This shadow work is kind of one of those processes that you can use to mitigate this. And it can be done through meditation, through psychedelics, there's some, ayahuasca.
Yeah, there's some therapeutic modalities that are really good for processing shadow material as well. I don't think there's one right way to do it, and different things work for different people. But that general direction of just making the unconscious conscious is super useful.
Definitely, 100% agree. And you got to go in there, and a lot of people I see a lot of people doing that. I also see a lot of people skating around the edges, because, in a form of spiritual bypassing or, psychedelic consciousness, altered state bypassing and materializing and, grabbing onto things as like trophies and ornamentation to say like, look what I've done. I've done 40 ayahuasca ceremonies. How many have you done?
Yeah, we call that gemstones. Collecting gemstones along the path.
Yeah, gemstones for sure. Well, this gets me to like, and I know we're probably heading up here on wrapping. How are you guys doing for time?
We've got a little bit longer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Like I really love Terence McKenna when he talks about the felt presence. The felt experience of the felt presence of direct experience. And that's something that I've really embodied and tried to live by. Is just like, big in doing psychedelic ceremonies, in a very sacred way with respect and reverence to the process, to really deepen myself into every aspect of the totality of my being and in the multitudes that I am, and like feeling what that feels like and experiencing it for myself. So this goes back to, this kind of abdicating responsibility and that kind of dependence model, and I wonder if you like has psychedelics or variations of altered states played a part in shaping the unfolding of your process for you guys?
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
DMT, ayahuasca, mushrooms, pot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's all really contributed.
Yeah.
But there's a way to use it. It's never been
Yeah.
like a social party thing. It's always been like the Terrence McKenna style, take 6 grams in silent darkness.
Hero dose in silent
Yeah.
darkness.
Yeah. Yeah. I try and do one pretty much almost every change of the season. So I did one like last Sunday. It was the full moon. It was great. It was wonderful. And so like I always kind of use it to with the intention of like cleansing and clearing and like creating more space, and opening up more of like a relationship with like every microorganism that's inside of me, like listening to what my body is saying, like clearing that capacity and trying to create, like defragging the computer, and it's a wonderful reminder. And I think that, so I think initially when I reached out to you guys, I was telling you about how like I feel like I'm a little bit becoming insulated in this like psychedelic community. Like I'm here in Denver, we decriminalized mushrooms, it's great, but a lot of the talk that we see and we hear from organizations like MAPS and Hefter Institute, Imperial College of London, like these places, it's like really, really focused on like the therapeutic healing kind of scientific medical model. And that's good. That's great. But there's also what comes with that is like government control and regulation and, these sorts of things. And, I think it's preventing like really radical psychedelic thought or like so-called psychedelic thought. It's just, when I found you guys, I was like, well, this is psychedelic thought. I mean, what the psychedelic is, like mind manifesting into the world, like coming into being. So I wonder, I don't know, do you have any thoughts or opinions on that kind of stuff? Or maybe, like bubbles that insulate people from thinking in particular ways and stuff like that, or from psychedelic thought community particularly?
Well, it's kind of a really broad question to get into. Like, I'm not really sure how to frame it, but I can think of some things that are kind of relevant, and I think more pointed. Psychedelics have played a huge role, but only in the extent of it being parallel to a practice.
Mm-hmm.
In that practice could be of inquiry or shadow work or any number of things.
Meditation.
And I just wanted to add on to the last point about shadow work that there is so much to be gained through a willingness to just face your own dark side.
Yeah.
And face what you're afraid of, and to use your emotions as a compass to point you in the direction. Like anytime that bubbling, like, oh, I don't want to think about that, I don't want to feel that, I don't want to do that. Anytime that feeling comes up, orient towards it. Don't shy away from it. Point towards it. Investigate. And you can use psychedelics to help with that kind of stuff. You can use meditation as well, of course.
Mm-hmm.
As well through various experiences. I would say DMT being the biggest one. I recognize the necessity of a good meditation practice to be able to focus and gain something from those experiences, because they're so wild and so crazy, and there's so many like shiny objects to run towards in a DMT experience that it's like, Terrence McKenna had said, don't give into astonishment. And I think meditation is the tool to not give into astonishment.
Yeah.
There's just so much more beyond the tunnel.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could get lost in the magical forest and be like, wow, this is let me just stay here. This is wonderful. Yeah. But what is it telling you? What is it communicating to you? What is something that you can extract from it and integrate it, And
there's always such a meta level. Like it's like so many times through DMT or mushrooms, there's just been one level of experience where I'm, everything's psychedelic and crazy and, deep fractal patterns and all this stuff. And I'm seeing images of past and present and relationship interactions and all of this kind of stuff. But there's always, in analyzing that experience weeks or months later, there's always this meta level of recognizing how I was in that state, the reflection of myself on that state. And let's say, for example, my desire to have meaning or to tell a story. We used to do DMT or mushrooms and then record podcast episodes shortly after. We actually recorded audio and then made podcasts later, having reflected on what we recorded. But it was still, there was this like desire to find a story so that we could tell our listeners, some new interesting insight from doing DMT. And like an analysis of that over time, I started recognizing like that's a whole egoic thing to just try and pull stories or lessons from something in order to share them.
Right.
Like, am I really finding anything that's of value to just me on a very deep and personal level? Because that's what it's for.
Yeah. Dude, I was in this place and I saw this thing, and it turned into this elf that had a dragon head. It's like, I remember listening to like Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus going on there and talking about like the dragon and the ayahuasca and all this stuff. And like, I kind of wish that I didn't before I went to drink ayahuasca, because it sort of set me up for some expectations, even though I was trying really hard to not have expectations. It's like, that's, to me, it's like, that's not the point. It's not, the point isn't like seeing the things and telling the story. And, even though it could be cool or it could be fun or it could be interesting, it's like, it's to the point to me of psychedelic use is to walk, like to be the thing that you're getting from the experience and act it out and live it out in the world, to a degree that feels like it's, connected to something productive in like the environment to help lift yourself up and maybe others around you, something to that degree,
Mm-hmm. I find it really useful to take a shamanic approach to all of these practices, because, and I mean that in the very kind of old sense, what shamans used to do in pre-agricultural society. And so it's, first of all, it's entirely self-directed. Like, you might have people who are kind of helping you figure out some basic things, but at the end of the day, it's just you versus the grand mystery. And so it has to be self-directed. Secondly, it's about constantly breaking your own frames. So if you get stuck in any kind of like, oh, I figured it out, or like, I've reached this level of development, or, anything, or in the modern psychedelic communities where people are, dick measuring with each other, like I've done 50 ayahuasca ceremonies or whatever, like that is a frame that you have solidified into. So, okay, recognizing what's the glass box that you're in, and then going and breaking that again. And then the next thing solidifies, and then breaking that again. So psychedelics are an excellent tool for breaking your frame, but you can also get stuck in a certain kind of frame if you're doing lots of psychedelics. So both of us have done lots of different practices. Like, Mike mentioned shadow work, or meditation, or self-inquiry, or even travel and living in different cultures. It can really change how you look at the world, because people don't think the same in other places. Or just going into isolation. That's a classic shamanic tool, just separating yourself from society and all the social validation that we get there. And just sitting quietly with all of your thoughts and perceptions and facing all that stuff.
And then maybe, you can slowly kind of chisel off, or the cultural conditioning can slowly erode, and then you can kind of, the being that you really are can emerge out of that space. I think that's a great, tool. How many people, I was talking to someone the other day, I was like, just take a deep breath. Just take one deep breath. Can you do that? And they it was like even resistant to them to think about that, this like constant connection can be pretty overwhelming. And frying our sensory input organs, like, oh my god, like I'm too I need to be stimulated all the time. I need to go from one thing to the next thing constantly. But leaving that space is key. And I agree with you, Euvie. Like, that's the shamanic approach. I lived in the Peruvian Amazon with the Shipibo for a little while, and being there was amazing. There's some things that maybe you wish, like, you're a little detached, like some things that you wish you could had access to. But coming back, like after 6 months, and coming back into America was like, I felt like I had been like just thrust into this like aggressively crazy, hostile, like insane, psychopathic environment. And as soon as I landed in Miami airport, like every TV has either ESPN or CNN, Fox News on, like, oh, be afraid of this today, be afraid of that today, like whatever. You're just once you cleanse, out of you're so open, to receiving all that stuff. Do you guys have any like worries or concerns that you in your own lives and how you go about doing, making sense of things and making sure that you're like feeling good and connected with community? Are there any things that like maybe pop up, or fears or worries that either you yourself feel or see, or that maybe you see in others?
Yeah, there's pretty normal stuff. There's fear about environmental collapse, about economy, about your own cash flow,
about the increasing isolation.
Yeah,
people.
I mean, we're about to have a child as well, so there's things to do with that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
But all of that said, I mean, it's pretty human. I'm describing very human things. Like everyone has these experiences, but it's really about how those things get processed, which is what we've tended to focus on so much in the last several years. So those things are not really big issues, like there's action being taken. The external circumstance is always being responded to and planned for. But there's also an internal framework of processing those things that is quite good, quite effective and efficient. And it relates to all the things we've discussed so far. It's like, how do we process those inputs and then take action? And I would say both of us have quite a good framework for that. So there's not a lot of stress in our lives or worry or grief or any of that stuff.
Nice. Yeah. Can you give me like maybe an example of a way that you go about processing and how you go through this, method? I mean, I know you guys have, you do courses that you offer, and I think you referred to that you were on the call. Maybe, I'll obviously put some links and get people to take a look. But if you give it maybe like a little like sample of or an example rather of something that, you would go about doing for yourselves and in this work.
Sure. Well, the two courses are what we've already mentioned quite a lot in this call. It's the first one's sovereignty, and the second one's shadow work, and it's full of exercises. I think there are about 10 or so modules in each course, and each module has an exercise. Might be more than that, right?
Yeah, it's 10 or 11.
Yeah. And each one has an exercise that can take up to a week to do, sometimes longer. Sometimes people will take it and then go off on their own tangent, reading like a mountain of books and doing other practices, and then return to the course, several months later. So that's become a funny thing that it sets people off on any number of directions because there's so many exercises.
Yeah.
But I would say
I think it would be really interesting. This is something that we talked about yesterday, because you often take a very intellectual approach to processing the stuff. And I think it speaks to a lot of people who are very heady.
Yeah.
And so maybe you can give an example of that, and I can give an example of a body-based.
Oh, sure.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So I actually, that is definitely a good way to start. And I've been thinking about how to use materialism and logic and kind of that integral theory orange level of like attempting to unlock some embodied experience in people through language or through logic or through deconstruction. And a lot of that comes down to practices of finding what is true and what is real, and deconstructing your own perceptions about reality and who you are and what your identity is. And there's really simple but really, really profound things that you can do, questions you can ask yourself, that if you really take it seriously and go down the rabbit hole, there is like an insane set of realizations, cascading realizations that happen. And it's really simple. It's like, the first one is, what is true? Done. What is true? Go out there and ask yourself what is true, and then do the scientific method. Always try and refute anything you believe to be true. Try and break it down. And then the second one is, who am I? Where is my consciousness centered? Those two questions, I mean, I can't tell you the number of insane realizations and epiphanies that have come out of just those two questions for years, that have fed me for years and years and years. I mean, if you look at any book that talks about enlightenment, those are often the two questions that teachers or gurus will propose that the student does for years. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's a good way to use the intellect to deconstruct the intellect. Very non-specific, but just try it.
No, that's great. That's beautiful. What you said is great, is fantastic. And it reminds me of this when you were talking about truth. Byron Katie, has like these the author Byron Katie talks about like to continue or ask ourselves, like, is this true? How do I know it's true? Do other people, like these series of questions. I was trying to kind of pull it up because I forgot, but yes, I mean, yeah. And you were saying like it feeds you for years, like, right? It's like never ending, constantly checking in with that way. Euvie,
and anytime you find something that you think is true, that's an indication that you need to do the work on that and deconstruct it. And like, people arrive, it's so funny too, how much of a similar pattern everyone who does this work goes through. It's just like, you could just map it. It's really funny. People will latch on to, especially in spiritual or psychedelic communities, everyone's really latched on to this idea that the universe is love at the center of it. And like, universe is love and light, and you need to orient yourself towards good and thereby avoid feeling bad or facing the dark side. It's all really related to the shadow work stuff. So this is like one of those assumptions. How do you know? How do you know the universe is good at heart? What is true about that statement? And then seek to refute it. Can you find examples? Well, yeah.
It's another dogma, another trap, another area of worship to believe in. Euvie, what about for yourself?
So I've used that same method quite a lot, but I've also used some body-based practices for processing things. And I found those to be incredibly useful as well. And so here's how I would go about it. So if I felt a really strong emotion about something, that's usually a good indicator that there's something important here happening, because obviously the body is reacting and the body has a lot of wisdom, so it's not reacting for no reason. So what I would do,
if like you feel like a tightness in your chest or your stomach or something, so you're paying attention to that, cueing into that, right?
Yeah. So what I would do is I would put myself into a meditative state, kind of in a trance state, where I'm just not really thinking about what's happening, but more tuning into the feeling of what it feels like in the body. Where is it in the body? And try to notice what that sensation is like on a really kind of micro level. Like, is it tingling in my fingers? Is it hot or cold? Does it kind of feel electric? Does it come in waves? Is it pulsating? Or is it kind of like more of a stable kind of thing? Does it go away quickly, or does it linger? And just kind of try to really figure out the flavor of the sensation and really kind of ride the wave of it. Just relax into it, even if it's uncomfortable, especially if it's uncomfortable. Just allow to kind of, for myself, to become completely one with it. And then I notice that once I do that, it gets processed very quickly. And it's a very nonverbal thing and very not an intellectual thing, but something seems to happen, something releases. It's almost like, the way that I've described it is like the body is trying to say something, and this is how I would make sure that it's getting heard fully, by really tuning into that feeling. And then once the body is heard, it's almost like some sort of new wisdom is gained. But again, it's not verbal. It's not like a gemstone that I can say, oh, I figured this thing out and I can write it out in words. It's more of a felt thing. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's been super useful.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, and I would say that it is an intelligent thing. It is, very intelligent. It's communicating to us, our body. I've done a lot of ketamine therapy and working in a this like somatic approach, like tuning into the body and like learning how to listen to what is happening in the different organs and what they're trying to say to me. You know, it's, I mean, obviously somebody who's not really in our genre or whatever, like outside, could be like, well, that's woo woo crazy stuff, right? It's like, well, it's really not. And so I think that's a great approach to take, because so many people are so disconnected from their bodies. You know, we walk around like we're just these lumbering brains, like Krang from the Ninja Turtles, you know, just like it's a big machine body walking around, just lugging this brain around. But yeah, when we pay attention, when we listen, there's some real wisdom in there for sure. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that stuff, guys. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to, so, and, you know, I just want to also say that, like, you know, this stuff isn't just like, obviously the work that you're doing and the practices that you're engaging in is so you could live a more peaceful, like, life and more harmony with like deeper connections to the real things that excite us as human beings. What, like, do you guys have any like burning questions that you're just like aching to know or to figure out? I mean, maybe when you have someone on the show and you're interviewing them and it's like really something that you're trying to understand, or I don't know, I'm just kind of curious as to what's like tickling the neurons in your meat computers.
I love learning. Again, it's more about a process than a specific state or an answer I need. It's more about trying out processes, using processes. So I'm obsessed with learning. So I constantly am picking up new things. I'm learning Python right now.
Oh, cool.
And I've got these, I can't pull it because it's all cabled up, but I've got a Raspberry Pi that I'm playing with. That's been pretty cool. Learning animation, stuff like that. That's just always fun. And then picking people's brains who I respect or think have interesting things to say. It's always, there's always tons to think about and play with your curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, it's been really about an embodied process. And it's really interesting that Mike and I are so different in so many ways, and our approaches are so different, but often we arrive at the same conclusions.
Yeah, you guys really complement each other really well, you know. Yeah, yeah.
We often joke that we're like together we make one kind of full human being between the two of us, but we really have some sort of a symbiotic collective intelligence, the Mike Euvie organism, that we occupy a really different kind of niches of it. But yeah, together we really bring a lot to each other. But yes, to say that my own process has been super embodied for the last few months, and it's been really nonverbal, and kind of I'm still figuring out ways to describe it. I'm going through my first pregnancy, so it's been a very interesting initiation from nature into a different state of being, and it's a lot about kind of allowing and turning within rather than going out there and doing anything. So it from the outside, it looks like nothing is happening, but lots is happening on the inside. It's like I'm mutating in real time. And it's, I'm sure I'll have more to say about it in the future, but it's been a very, very interesting process because it's something so simple and human, and yet it's so profound.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And so, and you're, you know, bringing a new life form into the world. Maybe I'll end the call with just like a grand vision. Like what kind of world do you want to, like, what's your ideal world that you want to bring him into? Or he or she? I would,
I don't know if we can do this as a humanity, but what I would really love to see is a world that is focused around the principle of omni-thrive. So what this means is that every living thing and every living system is able to thrive to its maximum capacity while also allowing all the other living things to thrive. So it doesn't mean that, you know, the lion doesn't eat the gazelle. because that is part of the ecosystem. So yeah, that is required for that ecosystem to thrive. But what is the process in which everything has the capability to maximally thrive? So that would mean that we would have to be a lot more in tune with our own bodies, and in tune with each other, and in tune with other living beings on this planet, with the plants and animals and ecosystems. And the whole biosphere would have to be in tune with itself.
Yeah. Yeah. A living, awakened world. Yeah. How about for you, Mike? What do you think?
A lot of the work that we're doing, I think if that were to manifest in the world, like more people were to get exposed to these ideas, I think it would create a pretty awesome world. I mean, first of all, I'd love to see debates and conversations on the internet and on TV and in the media be more about seeking truth than about winning. And that's one thing I think that would change really immediately, is like, how do we converse with each other? Do we find truth? Do we improve by exposure to one another? I'd like to live in a world that's more able to do that. And that's more of an immediate next step. It's not quite so far into the future as what you've described, but I think it's possible and moving in that direction. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, great. I think you guys are a big part of that process, being sort of a beacon of light that's sort of, orienting around truth, constantly, circumambulating around the where is the point of wholeness and connectedness. And so, if you're doing that and you're walking that, you're also giving other people permission to do that as well. Like you were saying, like learning on your own and creating these things on your own. So it's I think it's happening. We're moving there. I'm optimistic. You guys sound like you are too. So yeah, it's great. I think this has been a great conversation. It was great to kind of get to know you guys and to chat. I really didn't have like a direction that I wanted to go in, but just kind of be open and curious. So thanks for being here and participating in this.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You got it. Cool. So and then go to, you want to tell people where they can go to find your stuff, Future Thinkers podcast and the website, courses and all that?
Yeah, futurethinkers.org. We're doing some changes to the back end of the site right now, so it might be down. So I won't give any specific links to that, but just go to futurethinkers.org, and in the nav menu, there'll be everything. And if you're really new to the podcast, then go to click the start button in the nav, and you'll get a list of all the current episodes, current projects, the courses, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Yeah, I love what you guys are doing. You guys are just putting together some awesome stuff and curating some great, thinkers and picking some good brains. So keep picking, keep chipping away, and cool. Hopefully we could do this again. Thanks again, guys.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Hope you guys like these podcasts and enjoy them. And if you do, please spread the podcast, share it, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker, tell a friend, tell a cat, tell a mouse, tell a dog, tell an ant, tell a firefly, tell whoever you tell. Share it, spread it, like it, all that good stuff. If you really love the show, you want to go a step further, you really want to help us out, leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and go to patreon.com, Patreon/Mike Brank, and patreon.com/Mike Brank. And you can donate as little as $1 a month, $2 a month, whatever you want. Help support the show that way as well. But remember, I love you guys no matter what you do. I just love that you tune in and you enjoy these podcasts. Message me. I like hearing feedback. Get in touch with me on Instagram, Mikeadelic Podcast, Mike Brank on Facebook as well. And but thank you once again to everybody. Thanks to Danny Barnett and Galaxia for the music, the intro and the outro. I love you all. Peace.